You've got your football game off, so you're not distracted for our show here.
Oh, I've got it on still. Just
We're
gonna turn it
filming a
on.
podcast. You can turn it off.
The Division III basketball season's rolling along, and so are we on the D3 Datacast, back for another week. Thanks for joining us. If you haven't clicked subscribe yet, please do so. Remember that you can connect with us on social media, on Twitter at D3Datacast and Facebook.com/D3Datacast. Matt, welcome back. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so it's been an interesting week, and I think the best way to talk about it is actually just to start with your top 25 ballot. So why don't you take us through that, and then I think we'll have some things to talk about therein.
Yeah, let's take a look. So here, appearing on your screens through the magic of television, is the top 25 ballot that I have submitted to d3hoops.com this week. And I think there's not a whole ton of movement along the top. Biggest thing is Williams maybe fell out a little bit from the top 10 to number 12. Keene State dropped a bit as well. Middlebury enters the top 10 after beating both of those two teams. So Middlebury had a very good week, probably the best week out there in Division 3 if you want to pick a team that won the week, you'd say Middlebury. Then in the back half of my top 25, maybe the UWs moved up slightly. I think Oshkosh and La Crosse, for maybe the first time in a long time, both kind of won games they were expected to. They've both been kind of strong all along, but the WIAC has maybe shaken out a little bit differently than we expected as far as a team not really dominating. But Oshkosh and La Crosse are kind of making their way back up my list to a little bit. Roanoke, I'm actually hanging on to Roanoke at 19. I think I had them as high as 14 last week. They took two losses. It was to Guilford and to Randolph-Macon, two teams that you can see I now have in my top 5. So I penalized them a little bit for that, but I still think Roanoke's a good team. The computers still think Roanoke's a good team, a top 20-ish team, so I'm holding on to them at 19. We'll see how that goes in the coming weeks as well. Rowan jumped in at number 22. They had a big win over Stockton, I believe it was. And Claremont Mud Scripps at 23, down a couple of spots. They had an overtime loss to Pomona Pitzer, a big rivalry game, but I dropped them a little bit. I think Texas Dallas enters for the first time. They've kind of been around that 26 to 30 range for me for a little while. And then I'm keeping Calvin at 25. Some teams jumped in from behind them and fell out from ahead of them. Calvin obviously had a big win at Trine on Saturday. Trine was ranked, I think, 16 maybe by the D3hoops.com voters. I had them in my top 25 as well. I dropped Trine out. But kind of balancing that from Calvin last week was a single digit, I think a 9-point win at home against Kalamazoo, which to me was a little bit of a negative. I was thinking after that game, well, am I going to drop Calvin out of my top 25? But they had the big Trine result. So I kind of held them in place and kind of decided that's what to do with Calvin. So that's kind of my top 25, Zach. I don't know if you have thoughts on this ballot here or on the Division III landscape in general.
Yeah, the first thing I just wanted to talk to you about is right at the top. We saw last week when the official poll was released that Randolph-Macon had picked up, I believe, 3 first place votes from St. Joseph to close that gap just a little bit. So I just thought I'd ask about how you're thinking about that, kind of what scenario might get you to make that switch, because obviously you've got St. Joseph here still in the top spot, and their opportunities to impress schedule wise have already taken place, and it's almost like they can't do anything really to gain. It's more like, are they going to win by the 20 to 30 that they should, just to hold on? What are the scenarios? And then also on the Randolph-Macon front, just with the strength of the ODAC and all that they've proven here since kind of their early season struggles, do you think that they have room even to take a loss that you would not drop them even from the 2 spot?
So I'll take that second one first. For Randolph-Macon, I think they do have room to take a loss and stay in the number 2 kind of spot, maybe number 2 or 3 kind of zone. It depends on who it's to and how they look. I have thought about it as far as them being number 1 and moving St. Joseph to number 2. I have not done that yet. I know Randolph-Macon has played the stronger schedule lately in ODAC play. St. Joseph had a really strong non-conference schedule. I think they did well to schedule a lot of good teams non-conference. To me, though, St. Joseph hasn't really stumbled at all. They really haven't even played a close game in GNAC play that I would consider, a questionable result. They haven't even really had that kind of a result. So they're both 1 and 2 for me. I'm keeping them the same. I'm someone that likes the computer ratings. My computer says St. Joseph 1, and Massey says Randolph-Macon 1. So I definitely do not fault anyone that has them either way. I definitely have thought about it myself, but right now I'm keeping St. Joseph. but I could continue to check the results and could end up putting them number 2 at some point if Randolph-Macon continues to impress.
And staying in the ODAC, you've got Guilford 5, which I was really interested to see if they would make a big leap up here. They were 17th in last week's D3Hoops.com poll, and they've been a team I've been watching that I feel like could have been ranked a lot higher sooner. And I don't remember where you had them before. I don't really pay, that close attention to your ballot anyway, so I don't remember what you had them before, but they've been a team I've watched kind of waiting for them to take that big rocket up the pole, and it looks like maybe this is going to happen now. Their week they beat Roanoke and at home, and then they won at Virginia Wesleyan. So their only blemish is a really close loss, or only blemish in conference play is a close loss to Randolph-Macon, and then those other results this week where they've separated themselves from maybe that tier 2 pack,
Yeah.
and solidified themselves really as another tier 1 team in the ODAC.
Yeah, they've been impressive against everyone. Even in that last Randolph-Macon game that they played, what was that? Maybe early January. They lost on the road by 3 to Randolph-Macon, so that's not even a loss I would really ding them. Guilford's a team I've been voting for since at least late November, going back to my record. So I've been voting them for most of the season. I've been voting them in January. I've been voting them 12 or higher, and they're a team that's been in the top 10 in both of those computer ratings basically all of this month. So yeah, I think they're a team that I've been looking to as a team that could be kind of meteorically rising through the top 25. And based on the numbers, the metrics, types of things that you see, I think a number 5 rating is just right where Guilford can be.
And then the other one I want to talk about was Williams. You ended up not really dropping them much. And they're one, going back to last week, we kind of talked about this tension between a team like Williams, who maybe hadn't really proved themselves as a top 25 team based on just their schedule, but they also hadn't yet proved they weren't. Now this week,
Yeah.
they lost to Middlebury, so that would be one of those games where they could have really proven that they belong here in the thick of the top 25 ballot, but they lost that game. So are you starting to think about Williams a little bit differently? Because if you look at their overall who they've beaten, I think the only team in the Massey ratings top 75 that they've beaten is Wesleyan. And that was earlier in the year. Wesleyan was one of the most disappointing teams
Yeah.
nationally. That loss capped a 2-5 start for Wesleyan. And other than that, it's kind of slim pickings as to who Williams has actually beaten.
Yeah, Wesleyan has played better since that game, so part of me makes me think, okay, that's maybe a better win than we thought it was at the time. I had Williams, it looks like as high as number 2 in the country, going back to December or so, and since then, like we've said, they haven't had they haven't had a lot of bad results, but they haven't had a lot of great results like a lot of these other teams around them have had. And so since then, I had them at 2, then I dropped them to 3, then 5, then 6. Last week, I think I had them at, let me check my notes here. I had them at 7 last week, and I dropped them down to 12 after the Middlebury loss. So, yeah, they've been a team that's been slowly kind of been falling kind of week by week. The opposite of a team that just floats up because they're winning and teams around them are taking losses. They've been a team that, they've won maybe, but it hasn't been a great win. Or they won a game against RPI earlier in the season that looked like a great win, and then RPI hasn't been terrific since then. So as that kind of value of that win wanes a little bit, I've kind of maybe softened my stance on Williams, and to me, in the teens or somewhere is fine for Williams. Still think they're a good team. I still think that they're maybe right in there in contention in the NESCAC, obviously. But yeah, not the top 5 team maybe I thought they were a few weeks ago.
And I talked about Guilford as the team that I've been watching, kind of waiting for them to take a rise. So now that they have, at least on your ballot, we'll see where they end up in the actual poll. But at least on your ballot, Guilford's made that move here. So I want to go to another team that I think maybe takes their place as that team that isn't quite getting the due that they deserve. And that I'm going to go to number 22 there. You have Rowan. You go back to last week's poll. It appears no one voted for Rowan at all anywhere on a ballot. You have them 22 here. We've talked about the NJAC race a little bit here, and maybe it's a conference that shapes up to look a little bit better in the regional ranking criteria than they always do in computer ratings or human polls. But it's a good league. It's strong at the top. Rowan currently is undefeated in league play. They've got the season sweep of Stockton, and they still have another game to play against Montclair State, but they've got now a 2-game lead over those two teams. Now you have moved them in. What are you thinking about Rowan and their upward mobility?
Yeah, I haven't ranked a lot of NJAC teams this season. I think I had Stockton on a couple of really early ballots, and then I took them out, and then now Rowan is in. That's a league to me that's not a top tier league. It's maybe a second tier league or a high third tier league, probably a second tier league. But they're kind of, we talk about a league like for much of the year, the WIAC or the CCIW kind of lacking in top 25 candidates. Like we see Wheaton in there, but other than that, we're used to seeing more CCIWs in the top 25. That's kind of where maybe the NJAC is right now. You just mentioned a bunch of those teams: Rowan, Stockton, Montclair State, Kane. These teams have been very good all season. We've been kind of waiting to see which one rises to the top. For me, that's been Rowan the last few weeks with some good results. We'll have to see playing Montclair State, let's say again, how those results shape up as well. But to me, they've been kind of solidifying themselves as maybe the top team there. I know some of the other teams are really good. That league's probably going to get a bunch of teams into the NCAA tournament. As you said, the criteria looks pretty good. But I've had a bunch of those teams on my watch list, even if I haven't ranked them. I actually just checked today. There are 103 teams that at some point I considered for a top 25 spot. I've now whittled that down to, I think, 43. But still, there's several of those NJAC teams that are in that spot. So they've kind of survived a bunch of the cuts as I cross teams off the list. But a bunch of NJACs have stayed. They haven't quite made it in there, but they've been kind of hanging around. So I've been considering them each week. And yeah, for me this week, based on the results, based on how metrics and things look, Rowan came out strong for me.
Yeah, sometimes those kind of leagues, they beat each other up at the top, but it really, so far at least, seems like Rowan is immune to that dog pile at the top and emerging as the one who's getting the wins over those other top teams. So interesting there. I was just interested to hear how you were thinking about them. So, well, Matt, as we talked about this, it feels like if there's such a thing as like the dog days of the Division III basketball season, maybe we're in it right now, right? Because the freshness of the season maybe has worn off, where most conferences are at or approaching, if not already beyond, the midway point of league play. But we're also a couple weeks out from the first regional rankings. So maybe we're a little bit early in this, but we wanted to take a little bit of time in this episode and just kind of run through all the milestones that are coming up here, which will be hitting fairly soon. That's going to propel us here towards crowning a national champion. So starting with the upcoming calendar here, the first thing that's going to hit is we're going to start getting our weekly regional rankings. The first set due Tuesday, February 7th. And we're going to go into a little bit more in depth into what each one of these means. And there's a little bit of some differences in how these rankings are presented and what they're used for and what they mean. But the first set comes out February 7th. The next week we'll get the second set, and then the next week the third set, and then it's that big one. Monday, February 27th is the selection show. So the committee will be working. They'll be making that final set of regional rankings on February 26th, and that's the one at-large bids will be awarded from. So, kind of what we'll be getting along the way is an insight into maybe how the committee is thinking about these things. But really, it's the fourth set that are really important. Then once the tournament's set, March 3rd and 4th will be our first and second round games. March 10th and 11th, third and fourth round, those sectional sites. And then culminating with March 16th, we'll have the Final Four semifinal games, and March 18th, the national championship. So like we said, we'll go in a little bit more in depth because there's some important things to note about each of these along the way. So starting with the first regional rankings on February 7th. Matt, you want to give a little more in-depth explanation of what's going to happen there?
Yeah, so in about 2 weeks, we'll start to get these regional rankings. That's when the ball's rolling downhill in Division III season. We have rankings every week. We're leading up to conference championships, to the selections, to the tournament. So things are really going to get going in earnest. I feel like we're on the precipice of that right now. Like you said, in the next week or two, teams are going to be making that turn in conference play and coming down the home stretch. So yeah, February 7 will be the first set of regional rankings. That's a Tuesday. The regional rankings will be announced on Tuesday. They usually use data through the Sunday before, so there's a Monday game that won't be reflected in here. But the first regional ranking is unique in that it's always listed. Well, starting last year, it's been released alphabetical. So they tell you who is ranked in each region, but not the order. The committee says that's because they don't have all the data. There are no regionally ranked opponents, so they don't have results versus regionally ranked opponents. I don't really buy that argument. I'll get into that in a minute, a little bit. But anyway, this is how this is released. No matter how many times I remind myself before I click on the link that it's alphabetical, I click on the link and I'm like, Calvin's on top of the region. Why is Calvin number one? And then I check through my data, and then like it occurs to me like, oh, this is it's C's before M, and Mount Union's M, so it's after. So that's going to happen to me. It's going to happen to you. But remember, this is alphabetical. It's just going to say who's ranked, right? So, but they say they don't have all the data, so they can't say who's 1, 2, and 3. But they're saying who's in and who's out, so they're making those determinations. I say just do a ranked list with the criteria you do have, and then next week you'll be able to iterate again. But whatever. It's going to be an alphabetical list. First regional rankings, February 7. Just remember, we'll know who is regionally ranked, not necessarily the order. But if you follow D3 Datacast on Twitter, if you follow me on Twitter at FFTMAG, if you follow at D3 Bubble on Twitter, if you look at our data, you'll pretty much know who's ranked in what order. We can get you pretty close directionally to that as far as things go. And we'll probably do a predictions episode as far as what the regional rankings will look like, on Monday before they come out on Tuesday. So hopefully you follow us and you can get a pretty good idea where things are. So that'll be the first one, February 7. February 14, Valentine's Day, we'll fall in love with the committee all over again for a second set of regional rankings. And here on the screen is an example of Region 7 again. But this time we'll see the numbers 1 through 7 that the committee has. Then we'll get the data sheets to see what the SOSs are to make sure that it matches up with the data that I run, that Drew runs, and we'll start to get those regionally ranked opponents mixed in now. So we'll have the previous week's list of who's ranked. Now the committee's data sheets will measure each team's performance against those teams, and we'll get results versus regionally ranked opponents. That RRO category always lags a week at this time of year, so it's off of last week's list. But they'll be incorporating that data into their rankings. We'll get the official list, and then we'll be able to kind of like make tweaks with my data to see, does this committee look like it's valuing strength of schedule versus winning percentage in a different manner than previous committees did, yada, yada. But we'll get official stuff at that point. So this will be the first look at actually who's number 1 in a region, who's number 2 in a region, and that'll be February 14. After that, we hope that there will be a top 16 reveal again. I don't know that it's been officially confirmed, but this is something the committee did last year. It seems like it was received very well. So if it's the same time frame as last year, around February 16, a Thursday, is when we could expect that. And this is when the national committee puts out their list in order of, like, we think these are the number 1 through 16 teams based on our criteria, and that's important. The biggest reason that's important is 16 is 1/4 of the tournament field. So these are the teams most in line to host those first and second round pods. So if you want home games for the NCAA tournament, first and second round, you really want to be in the top 16. So here's like a screenshot of my data, who might be, I haven't like combed through all this, but it just based on some raw numbers, who could be in the mix for that top 16. This is not a prediction at any point, but it's just an example of what this might look like. And these are the teams that will be most in line to host. We know geography plays a big role in bracketing and potting up teams in Division III, but if you're in the top 16, you've got a really good chance. And if you're at the higher end, maybe you're in the 1, 2, 3, 4 spot, then you might have a chance to have kind of that quadrant, whole quarter of a bracket built around you in a way that you might be in line to host a second weekend sectional pod if you are so fortunate to that. So this is a good insight to what the committee's thinking as far as comparing regions top to bottom, what the nation looks like, and who might be in a great position to host. But we're still a couple weeks out from the actual selection, so there's still work to be done adding and subtracting to resumes at this point.
Yeah, let's just discuss this point a little bit, because this is the one, and it wasn't spelled out in the dates in the pre-championship handbook. So and we don't have confirmation that this is happening. What we heard last year when Mike Schauer was the chair, when they did this for the first time, actually the men and the women did this for the first time jointly. They each did it on their own, and it seemed like they really liked liked it because it gives them a run through for the process that they will go through, when they're setting up the bracket. So it gives them a chance to practice, and it's an extra step of transparency for the committee to communicate with the rest of the Division III fan base of how they are seeing the current picture. I think if there's a reason why this might not happen, I know last year there was a whole video, like whole production, kind of NCAA selection show type production put out around it. So it may not be up to the committee whether they want to do it or not. It may require buy-in from the NCAA to devote the resources that they devoted to it last year. Now, that's not to say they could do this on their own and just put out a tweet saying, here, this is what it would be. But last year they did have like a full 30-minute production where they had interviews with the committee chairs and went through 1 through 16 on both the men's and women's side. It was really impressive, and hopefully we get to see it again. But again, we don't know that will happen. And, with the NCAA, you never know how they're going to be feeling about devoting resources.
Exactly. So the next step after hopefully a top 16 reveal, we go into the third set of rankings. This slide's the same as the second set of rankings. I don't know the future to change the data, but what's important about the third set of rankings is now this set of rankings becomes permanent. So when you get to the final selection time, selection Sunday, the results versus regionally ranked opponents includes teams that were ranked in the third and fourth set of regional rankings. So this is the last set we will see before championship weekend and selection Sunday. And this will also feed into those results versus regionally ranked opponents. So we'll know that a team, if you have a win against one of these teams, you're locked in to get credit for that. Even if they maybe fall from 7 to 8, they still count as a regionally ranked opponent. So this is a biggie. This is a good one. You want to be ranked here, and you want to have teams you play against want to be ranked here as this kind of sets in. But then next after that, this is it. This is February 26th and 27th. This is the Sunday. Teams are finishing conference championships, or maybe have just finished their conference championship. We're all like, please don't tip off your game at 4:00. We want to like make predictions and stuff. But what will happen is the committees go in secret and they do their final regional rankings. They do the same process, all 10 regions, and then they select their Pool C teams. Pool C is at large. We talked about some of this in our How to Make the NCAA Tournament video from earlier this season. But what they do, the process of selecting teams, is they take all 10 regions, they cross out the teams that have already won their automatic qualifier from their conference, their Pool A, they take them out, and then they take the top remaining team from each region 1 through 10, and they put them on the board. So on your screen here are, Region 1, Middlebury, 2, Brandeis, Rochester, Stockton, Johns Hopkins, Guilford. Maybe these are the teams that didn't win their Pool A, right? So they're on the board. And then the committee will look through and assess the resume based on the criteria, the 5 primary criteria: winning percentage, strength of schedule, results versus regionally ranked opponents, head-to-head common opponents, and they'll select a team. So let's say they come up on this list and they pick Rochester. Hey, Rochester is our first team. We're going to take them off the board, and we're going to slide in that next team from the same region. So maybe Oswego State from Region 3 now hits the board, and now we're comparing them against the same 10. They go through that process again, and they'll pick the next team on and on and on until they have 20 Pool C bids. And that's how they pick the at-large. That's how they fill the tournament. So now we'll have 44 Pool A's. We just finished conference championship weekend, and now we have 20 Pool C's. So we have a tournament of 64 teams selected, and then we need to bracket them and put them into the tournament. So that's looking ahead to for the first and second rounds on March 3rd and 4th. 16 host sites will host the first and second rounds. So that's 4 teams at each site in pods. We kind of call them pods. And the hosts are based on NCAA criteria, that seeding and geographic considerations. So as much as possible, we talked about the top 16 reveal. As much as possible, the NCAA tries to reward those 16 teams. They're the most deserving teams with hosting opportunities in the first and second round. So how they do that is they take the teams and they organize them in 50-mile radiuses, essentially.
You said 50.
Oh, 50. If you're within 500 miles, you will bus to that school. If you're over 500 miles, they will pay to fly you to the school. And flying is a lot more expensive for a basketball team than busing. So that's a hard budgetary constraint number. So flights are usually limited to where they're absolutely mandatory. So getting a team from the Pacific Northwest or Southern California or Texas, where there are limited or no options within 500 miles. So they basically try to minimize those flights, 3 to 4 a year, and that's it. So if they can bus teams, they will. So you might take a team like Wheaton; they're in the top 16. Maybe they'll host a pod. So you might take a team from Wisconsin and a team from Ohio and a team from Michigan and a team from Iowa and try to put them in Wheaton. And you want to balance the region, so there's seating considerations all across. You don't want to put UW Oshkosh and Wash U and all those teams right in one pod. So you want to try to balance it with seating and you want to balance it with geography. And that's what they're trying to do in the first and second round for those 16 host sites. And usually it comes out pretty well. The committee has done, I think, a very good job for at least 4 or 5 years now at getting a balanced bracket. Expecting another one this year. There's a lot of things you have to walk through as far as that geography is concerned, but usually we have a pretty good bracket, and so those first and second round games, round of 64, round of 32, when we exit that, we'll be kind of in the Sweet 16 zone, what we call the sectional round of the NCAA tournament. And those will go on March 10 and 11. We are in the Sweet 16 Elite 8 rounds Friday, Saturday. And the sites are determined in a similar way. Obviously, these are bracketed, so you know the winner of each pod, who they're going to play. But the same kind of game is played as far as where those games take place. So hopefully you take precedence with seeding, who was higher up in that list of 16 or 32 or whatever that is most deserving as a host. But then you have to determine, can you get the other teams there within 500 miles? If you can't, it might shift to another team in that grouping of 4 who can get all the teams there within 500 miles. So sometimes the best teams are not always rewarded because budget and geography comes into play. If you're out in the Pacific Northwest or Southern California, it's almost impossible, unfortunately, we're sorry, that you're going to be able to host the second weekend kind of games because you're going to have to fly 3 teams to you when maybe you're going to fly to Atlanta and 3 other teams are going to bus there. Atlanta's probably a terrible example because second weekend they're not great for geography either. But you get the point, right? So, a place like Wheaton, a place like Mount Union maybe does host. They're both kind of relatively deserving and they're kind of geographically central that they might have a good chance of hosting these Sweet 16 Elite 8 round kind of games leading up to the Final Four in Fort Wayne, which is our next slide here, March 16 through 18, semifinals and finals.
Right, this is the one that we know where the location will be no matter what. It doesn't matter who gets there, how they get there, what seed they are. We know that the Final Four will be in Fort Wayne, and that's because this is a different selection process. The NCAA puts it out to bid, and in the past, for quite a while, that was in Salem, Virginia. But the most recent time that the NCAA put it out to bid, I believe Salem did compete for that, but ultimately the NCAA awarded it to Fort Wayne, and that current agreement runs through 2026. And yeah, just like you would expect, that 4 teams make it there, 2 semifinal games, 1 championship game, and at the end of that weekend, the third weekend ends with a national champion. Last year, it was Randolph-Macon, and we'll see if they can defend their title.
And then the one thing new this year is the games will be Thursday and Saturday rather than Friday and Saturday
Right.
like they'd been in the past. They're building in an extra off day in between. So that'll add 1 day to the championship weekend, give the teams a day to rest, a day to plan and prep before the championship on Saturday.
Right. Not a luxury they get in the first 2 weekends because those are Friday, Saturday. But they did make that schedule change for this year for the extra day between the semifinals and finals.
So that's the whirlwind tour of things that will occur between February 7 and March 18. Basically, once a week, there's going to be a big event in Division III basketball as far as information release, regional rankings, tournament selections, bracketing, tournament games, the like. So I know a bunch of you are familiar with this process. You've been around Division III for a number of years. Some of you might be new to Division III, a new parent, a new follower, a new fan. A coach coming from another level, but this is kind of how things happen. I know we just kind of explained how a tournament works. Everyone knows how a tournament works, but the geography and the selection process is what can be kind of unique and interesting. And there's some nuance there as far as if you want to play the prediction game or who might host game or things like that, or where might we go in the bracket. You kind of it's got to be within 500 miles, things like that. So a lot to look forward to. Really fun time of the year. A couple weeks from now, we'll be in the thick of it. So keep following our show. We'll be talking about those types of things on a week to week basis.
Yeah, we should probably give a couple of those caveats because they do come into play. Less likely for hosting is that a school has a facility that doesn't meet
Mm-hmm.
the NCAA's basic requirements. We don't run into that too often. I know that, especially as a lot of schools have modernized and upgraded facilities, that doesn't come in so much. But I think there is a basic capacity number, and hopefully at this point we're past the point where teams have like non-regulation size
Mm-hmm.
floors and things like that. But going back a ways, even that came into play.
Yeah,
Um,
the capacity numbers are something like 500 or 750 for the first weekend and 1,000 for the second weekend. So they're not enormous capacity numbers. Don't quote me on those exact numbers. I think they're in the handbook. I could look them up, but I don't have them in front of me. But it's something like that. And we've seen in the past some really small gyms. Like I think Emerson has a really small gym, maybe wouldn't be able to host if they were happened to be in a position to.
yeah, and all schools need to actually apply or indicate
Yeah.
that they are willing to host. Sometimes there are facilities that are not available or things like that, or sometimes teams just aren't on top of getting their paperwork in and it's cost them hosting opportunities. Um, and then also that comes into play, like, Christopher Newport is an example where they have a really strong men's team and a really
Yeah.
strong women's team. The NCAA alternates, they don't allow both to host at the same time. So they alternate priority between first weekend and second weekend. Matt, do you remember what it is for this year?
I believe last year men had first weekend priority. I'm speaking just off the top of my head. So it might switch to women having first weekend priority this year. And if that's not correct, then it's the opposite. But yeah, they
Right. So
switch priorities. So
right. Let's say the women have priority this year. If Christopher Newport, for example, women are to host, the men cannot be considered for a host. So they would be
mhm.
for sure on the road that first weekend. But then if they all if they both advance to the Sweet 16 and Christopher Newport has a strong enough resume where they could be considered a host for both, then the men would get priority. And if they are selected, then the women could not host.
Yep, exactly. And if you're a team and you would like to host, submit your paperwork. It doesn't matter if you think you're the 64th ranked team. Submit your paperwork. Weird stuff happens that second weekend, and like I said, geography is a big wild card. If you make it through, there might be a weird situation where you are the only link to all these other teams within 500 miles, and they might choose your school to host. But we hear it from now and then. Teams didn't submit their paperwork because we didn't think we'd have an opportunity to host. Don't let paperwork submission be a reason why you don't host. Submit your paperwork.
Don't forget the cover sheet on that TPS report.
Yes, exactly. Anything else in the calendar you think we didn't cover, Zach?
I think that's it.
That's
I know,
it.
I know it feels like we're in the dog days, but it's going to be hitting fast and furious. The dial's going to be getting turned up here very soon,
Yeah.
before we know it.
And I think we've had a bunch of different fun segments of the season. We had November, we talked about all those great early non-conference games, those matchups. We had December where we had kind of holiday break tournaments, afternoon basketball. We have January where it's nice to get back into the rhythm of conference play. For our conference, it's always Wednesday, Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday. You just fall into that groove. And then November, what's next month? February. February is the next month, and we're going to get regional ranking season and then tournament selections. That's a fun time too. So we just have different phases of the season, and they're all great. And you're always ready to transition to the next one as we kind of groove through the
Different
year.
rhythms,
Yeah.
different dance steps. I
All
can't
right.
dance.
We'll stop dancing and we'll go over the pick review. So here's last week's picks. Had another great week for me. I was 1-4. First game was Roanoke. We both had Roanoke to cover the 7-point spread against Guilford. Guilford won by 11. We both missed that. I thought Stockton was going to cover the 6.5 at Rowan. Rowan whopped them and 69-107. Or Rowan was a 107-69 winner there. You win that one. Claremont Mud Scripps was 1-point favorites on the road at Redlands. They won by 3, so that's the one I get. Zach, you had Redlands. Then Wash U
And
was
Redlands had an 11-point halftime lead. I was
yes,
disappointed.
yep, and that was close. Then the whole once Claremont Mud Scripps caught up, the whole second half was within a possession or so. I think Wash U was half point underdogs at Case Western Reserve. They lost by 15, so I missed that one. Zach, you get it. And the D3 Datacast game of the week was a doozy back on Monday, a very good game. Middlebury was 7-point dogs at Keene State, but they won that game outright 86-82. And Zach, you had won that, and I missed. So going over the standings here, you were 3-2. You are 25-25 overall, back to 500. I was 1-4. Still ahead of you, 28-22. But I've had a few bad weeks in a row and have allowed you to catch up, and so I'm only 3 games ahead now. Okay. Let's go to this week's picks. Here's the slate, January 23 through 29. Our first game is Alvernia, 1.5-point underdogs at Widener. The next game was Dubuque at Nebraska Wesleyan. The computer says Nebraska Wesleyan is favored by 3 points. Our third game is Nichols, who is plus 3.5 at Western New England. Our fourth game is RPI. The computer says they are 6.5-point underdogs on the road at Ithaca. And then our D3 Datacast game of the week is Swarthmore and Johns Hopkins. Johns Hopkins is hosting that game, and my computer ratings say that Johns Hopkins is a 7-point favorite. So let's go back to the top, Zach. Who do you have?
This one I'm going to go with Widener. It was a Widener win in the first meeting in overtime. Just a small favorite here at home. I will take Widener.
Yeah, I think that's a good pick. I'm going to go Widener as well for similar reasons. 1.5-point line, not very, very big. I think they can cover that at home. Both these teams have had very good stretches of the season, but I think to me, Widener might be a little bit of a stronger team, and at home can cover the 1.5. Zach, Dubuque and Nebraska Wesleyan.
Yeah, Nebraska Wesleyan might be playing their best ball of the year. I will take them laying 3 at home.
Yeah, Dubuque was a team that I had ranked early in the year. They have not quite lived up to that, especially recently. Nebraska Wesleyan had played a strong schedule to start and maybe now won a lot of those games, but I think they're playing very well right now. I think that American Rivers Conference is very balanced, but the 3 points favorites at home, I think they can. I think they can lay those 3 and still cover. So I will go Nebraska Wesleyan as well. Third game, Nichols at Western New England.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember, but we actually had this game in our picks earlier in the season for the game at Nichols.
Oh, did we really? I
And,
didn't remember. I
yeah.
picked this game again.
Wow,
Part
you must really
2.
love Nichols in Western New England.
I do.
Yeah, so it is part 2, and maybe this is a fool me once, fool me twice situation. I picked Nichols and lost that pick the first time around, but I'm going to go with Nichols again here.
I'm going to pick Western New England. When I was looking at this game and just at Western New England in general this past weekend, I was kind of thinking like, are they one of the best teams in Division III that no one's really talking about? I feel like we haven't really had a Western New England discussion. I don't think they're like on the fringes of the top 25 or anything, but I think they're like a top 50 team in D3 maybe, and their Pool C numbers or their regional ranking numbers I think look strong. I think that's a Region 2. That's a Region 2 team. I we might be talking about them in March a little bit, and I think Western New England's good. I think 3.5. I think they can cover that one. Fourth game, Zach. What do you think? RPI and Ithaca.
Yeah, RPI came up in the top 25 discussion. That you're kind of giving. Was it Williams?
Yeah.
Who was it?
Yep.
Someone had a win over RPI, and then in hindsight, maybe RPI isn't quite what we think, but still, I think 6 points is a little big for me here, so I'm going to go with RPI.
Yeah, I'm going to go RPI as well for similar reasons. I think they still have a good defense. I think they were a team that was in the top 25 early in the season. I was voting for them. I think they have not played like that recently, but I think that play is still in them. Ithaca was a team that was on kind of my watch list at some points of the season, but I agree with you. 6 points to me feels too big, even though this one's at Ithaca, so I'm going to go RPI. That takes us to game of the week. Your pick.
Oh, I thought you were going to introduce it a little bit more, but I guess you did that at the top. Okay. Yeah, it's really interesting with Swarthmore and Johns Hopkins because I feel like they've been really tightly paired all year. Like even in the top 25, they've kind of been real close to each other. Results have been very similar. SWAT already does have one win against Johns Hopkins at home. I just feel for as similar as these teams are, I think quality wise, 7 points feels like too big, especially with SWAT already having the win over Johns Hopkins. So Swarthmore for me.
Yeah, I watched a bunch of that game that was at Swarthmore um, earlier in the season, and that game it was like one of the ugliest games I'd seen all season. Johns Hopkins in particular couldn't score. I think there was some good defense involved on both sides, but I think there was also a lot of open shots that were just missed. But I think in the end, I'm going to agree with you there. I think +7 for these two teams is going to be too much. That's the computer spread. Um, but I think there's I like Swarthmore as the better team between the two, but at Hopkins, maybe by 3 or 4, not by 7. So I'm going to agree with you. So only one difference in our picks this week. It's really going to come down to Nichols, Western New England part. Duh. I'm kind of recalling that earlier. I think we both maybe picked Nichols in that first game. So three picks
Maybe
for
you learned
Nichols.
from it and I
Yeah,
haven't.
yeah. So we'll see here. I did not know that was a repeat pick. So anyway,
Hey,
that's the
thanks for
picks.
paying attention.
We love that people are playing along with us. So post your picks on Twitter or down below. Tell us how you're doing, if you're beating us or not. You're probably beating Zach at least, but we'll see. That brings us up to Upset Watch. This week's Upset Watch, we're putting once again our Calvin Knights on Upset Watch as they travel to Olivet College on Wednesday. To me, this is a game that Calvin should win, that is favored to win. I think the Massey ratings and my efficiency ratings both predict a Calvin win, but by kind of more like high single digits, 7 to 9 points. That should be a comfortable enough win, but to me, Olivet's a team that has been gaining ground in MIAA play. They're maybe now like the fourth team in the conference race in my mind, kind of the top tier Calvin and Trine. Then maybe Hope is maybe a second tier by themselves. And I think Olivet has passed Albion for me as far as total team strength, and definitely I think they've passed him in the standings as well. So could be a tight one. Could be a little bit of a letdown after a big top 25 emotional battle with Trine this last Saturday. Then to play Olivet on Wednesday, who's a step below Trine as far as team quality. Maybe don't want to look past them. Don't want to get bit. So this could be a potential upset here in the making, but hopefully not. Go Knights.
And this will complete the MIAA's first round through conference play. So this would be for Calvin looking to finish the first half of conference play undefeated. And really, you could look at their conference schedule as being front loaded. Here, Olivet has moved into that tier below, Calvin and Trine certainly, and you could say either in a tier with Hope or just below Hope as well. But Calvin had their road games at Hope, at Trine, and here at Olivet, all in the first half. So could be a spot for a letdown game, but also a chance to really
Mm-hmm.
take a firm grasp on the conference race here. If they can get this one, finish that first half undefeated, and have really their toughest road games out of the way.
Yeah, turn around the second half, get 4 home games, 3 road games, and then have those other toughest teams of the conference come to your place. Would bode well for the second half of the conference season if Calvin can finish this first half unscathed.
Yeah, and Olivet is no stranger to playing top quality teams.
Yeah,
They've taken on a schedule that's quite
yeah,
difficult. In fact, you could say that they're playing a schedule more difficult than they really should at this
should.
point in
Mm-hmm.
where their program is. But they with Calvin coming into their place here, it's not the type of team they haven't seen. Now they haven't really gotten over the hump, but they've
Yeah,
played really good teams before, played some really competitive games. So it's not one that Calvin uh, would be able to escape if they take it too lightly.
yeah, for sure. All right, mailbag. Zach, do you have the first mailbag question for us?
I do. And this one came from Casey Kropka on Twitter. And he says, looking at non-conference matchups, what conferences would you like to see do a crossover event like the Big Ten and ACC do, or the SEC and Big 12 do during their seasons? And we should point out that we did see a pretty good event of this type earlier in the season when the NESCAC and UAA got together. I believe it was 4 teams from each of those two conferences playing kind of 4-team events where they swapped opponents. One was at Rochester and one was at Colby. There
I
was one
believe.
at a UAA site and one at a NESCAC site. So that's the kind
Okay,
of thing I
cool.
think Casey's getting at. So Matt, if you could create your own fantasy conference clash matchup, what would you choose?
Yeah, when we were first talking about this offline, I said maybe something like WIAC and CCIW, and you said, well, we already see those two conferences play a whole bunch. So I was maybe thinking too geographically. This is Division three after all. But then one I thought was maybe take the NESCAC and take the American Southwest Conference down in Texas and pair those two teams up. I always think about the NESCAC as a team that doesn't like to leave their area of the country too often to play other teams. Um, so bring them down to Texas one year, or bring Texas up to the Northeast, and pair those two conferences up. Let's see Mary Hardin Baylor play against Middlebury, and let's say UT Dallas play against Tufts, something like that. I think those games would be fun. Those conferences are similarly sized. It's always you have to kind of pair up 1-1. I think they're maybe only off by one team, so you play the top teams against each other or something like that. But that kind of geographic diversity, I think that'd be kind of fun. Get Texas, get New England together, and play NESCAC versus the ASC.
Yeah, so my approach to this was to take two conferences of similar quality that are geographically separated, like you mentioned. So I'm going to start with one that's probably pretty obvious. That would be a lot of fun. Is the ODAC and the WIAC.
Mm, that'd be fun.
Um, Now the ODAC is quite a bit bigger, so maybe you take maybe you take all eight from the WIAC and you match them up with
The
the
top eight.
top eight, the
Yeah.
top eight, or some eight from the ODAC, or you do just like a top six or something like that. That would be a lot of fun. Um, but one that maybe is a little bit of a dark horse that I thought would also be really interesting is the American Rivers against the OAC.
Mm,
Um, Again, they're kind of separated with all the Chicagoland and Indiana in between that. I don't think we see a lot of matchups between those
yeah.
kinds of teams. And OAC, I think, certainly has an advantage at the top, but then you get into maybe like teams 3 through 6 or 7. I think there would be
Yeah.
a lot of really good games, really interesting matchups. So that'd be my dark horse contender.
Yeah, that'd be a good one because they're not that far geographically isolated from each other, but just because of like you said, so many different conferences in between, they probably don't go all the way to Iowa to Ohio to play each other that often. And some of those games could be pretty good. Get Marietta and Dubuque or something like that matched up. That'd be fun as well. I like that one.
All right, thanks to Casey for sending that one in.
Yeah.
So the other mailbag question we had for this week came as a YouTube comment on last week's episode, came from Rob Hudson. Matt, this one's specifically directed at you. Regarding the Week 7 top 25 voting, can you talk about how you view John Carroll vis-a-vis Roanoke, since Roanoke is number 14 on your ballot, but sits just outside the top 25 among all voters, while John Carroll is number 9 among all voters, but was not included on your ballot. Thanks. And
Yeah.
before you start, Matt, shout out to Rob. Rob's been a great encouragement, leaving comments on YouTube. Hey, Rob, we appreciate you. Thanks for leaving the comment and the encouragement along the way.
Yeah, thank you for sure. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. For me, it's kind of similar this week. We went through my ballot. I did not have John Carroll in, and I had Roanoke still in. So I'm still kind of carrying that in through this week as well. I know John Carroll. I think they are good. They're a team that is on that watch list, kind of somewhere between 26 and 30 for me, and they have been for a number of weeks now. But uh, yeah, so a short answer, and I don't follow this kind of thing 100%, but John Carroll is outside of the top 25 on both the Massey ratings and my efficiency ratings. So right there, both computers think, they're on the fringes, but maybe not included. And both of those systems have Roanoke in. So I do kind of use those as general guides as far as, which teams am I considering. Both of those are high enough rated that I would be considering them, but just kind of an example of a computer system would see Roanoke rated higher than John Carroll. To me, as I look through John Carroll's schedule, let's say, they have a win in November at Wheaton, which is very good. They won by 4 points in what was a very good game. They have a close loss to Mount Union, and then their best wins are like Heidelberg and Marietta, who are good teams, but not top 25 caliber teams. So that's kind of John Carroll's schedule to me. Roanoke doesn't have as good of a win as John Carroll has. They don't have that number 5 win, but they've beaten teams like Whitworth. They've beaten Washington and Lee, who the computers like. They've beaten Barry, who's been on the fringes of the top 25, Virginia Wesleyan, and they've played, you know, competitive games, maybe not super close, but against Guilford and Randolph-Macon and the like. And they've against the rest of their schedule, I feel like they've generally performed very well. They also have a loss to NYU. So they've lost more games, but I think they've played a more difficult schedule than John Carroll has. When I look at John Carroll, to me, some things that stick out are games against the likes of Baldwin Wallace and Wilmington, where we're talking about like a 2-point win or a 5-point win. Things like that seem like they've happened too often to John Carroll. Whereas I feel like Roanoke has largely avoided those kind of games against teams rated in like the 100s or 200s level of teams. So I see a tougher schedule for Roanoke, and I see more consistent results. Whereas John Carroll, I see maybe like a Wheaton is maybe the best win out of the two. But then other than that, I see more inconsistent play and some results that are wins, but maybe questionable wins against teams that I wouldn't think too highly of. So that's kind of my difference in Roanoke and John Carroll. Now it looks very stark because I have Roanoke at, what do I have them this week at? Let me find it very quickly. I have them at 19 and I have John Carroll unranked. Last week it was 14 and unranked. But to me, once you get around that 15 range, the gap between 15 and 35 is very thin. So I have these teams still fairly tightly grouped together in my mind. It just comes out that for the last few weeks, John Carroll has been just on the wrong side of the top 25, and Roanoke has been just on the right side of the top 25 for me. And the ranked versus unranked doesn't suggest like a gulf between the two teams. In fact, I can look at my list here. I have John Carroll coming out at 28, so they missed by 3 spots in my top 25. And with how tightly bunched those teams are, you could easily see them coming in and Roanoke coming out in a couple weeks or whatever. But that's just kind of how I see those two teams, and that's my thoughts.
Yep. Thanks to both of our mailbag questions this week. We've enjoyed this segment, and it's entirely dependent on our viewers. So if you have anything that you would want to see us discuss, please send it in. Leave a comment here on YouTube. Send us a message through social media, facebook.com/D3Datacast, or on Twitter at D3Datacast. And when we see one come in, we put it on the slide right away and start thinking about it. So really appreciate those questions. Really appreciate the engagement, and looking forward to what you have for us next week.
Good job, team.